My stepmother convinced my father I was stealing from him. The CCTV cleared me too late. My father looked me in the eyes that used to call me his greatest blessing, and told me to get out of his house and never come back. He said it quietly. That was the worst part. Not screaming, not rage, just quiet. The kind of quiet that means a man has already made up his mind and nothing in this world will change it. I am Chindiman. I am 26 years old, and the woman who destroyed my family did it so carefully, so patiently, so precisely, that by the time anyone found out the truth, my father had already buried me alive. If this is your first time on this channel, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now because this story is going to shake something in you. I promise you that. Now let us go back to the beginning because this story does not start where you think it does. My father, Chief Sylvanus Okeke, is not a small man in Lagos. When people say that, they do not mean his physical size. They mean he is the kind of man who walks into a room and the room changes. He built his construction company from nothing, started carrying blocks on his head in Alaba in the early 90s, saved every kobo, slept on job sites, ate gari when he had to, and 20 years later, he had a company worth hundreds of millions of naira. Okeke Allied Construction. The name alone opens doors in Lagos. My mother, Ngozi, died when I was 9 years old. Breast cancer. She fought for 3 years and she lost the fight. And after she died, the house went silent in a way I cannot fully describe. My father loved her. He really, truly loved her. The kind of love that makes a man slow down and forget who he is when the person is gone. For almost 10 years, it was just us, my father, me, and my younger sister Adaura. My father worked, we went to school. Life was disciplined, structured, and honest. He did not spoil us, but we lacked nothing. We had a 4-bedroom house in Magodo, good schools, food on the table, a father who came home every night and asked about our homework. Then he met Chiamaka. I want you to understand something before I continue. When I first saw Chiamaka, I felt nothing negative, nothing at all. She was a pleasant-looking woman in her late 30s, neat and well-dressed, quiet-spoken. She smiled often. She brought food when she visited. She asked me about my job. I was working at an architecture firm by then, and she listened when I answered. She seemed kind. That is the thing about dangerous people. They seem kind. My father introduced her to us 6 months before the wedding. He sat us down in the living room, me and Adaura, and he spoke the way he always spoke when something serious was happening. Calmly, deliberately. He said Chiamaka had agreed to marry him and that she would be joining our home. He asked us to welcome her. He did not ask for our permission. My father has never asked anyone for permission in his life. But there was something in his eyes, something that looked almost like it was begging us not to fight him on this. Adaura cried a little. She was 17 then, still raw about our mother in a way teenagers sometimes are. But I told her to give Chiamaka a chance. I said it sincerely. I believed it. They got married in December. A big wedding in Ikeja. Over 400 guests. Chiamaka wore a cream-colored gown and danced well and laughed at all the right moments. My father was happier than I had seen him in years. Whatever personal grief I carried that day, I buried it. I smiled, I danced with my sister, I toasted the couple. I genuinely wished them well. That was 2 years before everything fell apart. The first thing you need to know about Chiamaka is that she was patient, dangerously, almost supernaturally patient. She did not walk into that house and immediately start throwing her weight around. She did not fight with me or my sister. She did not compete with our mother's memory or try to erase photographs from the walls. She cooked, she organized, she stayed quiet when my father came home stressed. She was, by every visible measurement, a good wife. But I started noticing small things, very small things. The first one was about 3 months after the wedding. I came home on a Saturday to have lunch with my father. I had moved into my own apartment in Lekki by then, but I still visited often, and Chiamaka was on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't hear me coming. I wasn't eavesdropping on purpose. I just came to get water, and I heard her say very softly into the phone, "Just be patient. These things take time." She heard me and stopped, smiled at me, asked me if I wanted lunch. I said yes. We ate together. Normal afternoon. But that sentence stayed with me. Just be patient. These things take time. I told myself I was overthinking it. She could have been talking to anyone about anything. But something shifted in my chest that day. Something small and cold. Over the following months, I started paying more attention. Not obsessively, not paranoid, just noticing. And what I noticed was this. Chiamaka was slowly but consistently moving my father away from his existing relationships. It started with the old friends. His childhood friend, Engineer Nwosu, who used to come every month for suya and beer. Suddenly, there were scheduling conflicts, misunderstandings, a forgotten invitation. My father's younger brother, Uncle Damian, who used to stop by without calling because that was just their relationship. Chiamaka started making small comments about boundaries and privacy and how Uncle Damian did not respect that this was a new home now. My father, who loved peace above almost everything, started keeping his distance from people who used to be close. I did not say anything. I didn't know how to say anything because every single thing had a perfectly reasonable explanation on the surface. Every. The financial conversation started about 8 months into the marriage. My father called me one evening, which was unusual. He normally texted. When I picked up, he sounded different, measured, like he was reading from a list of things to say. He asked me about the company card. I was technically a signatory on one of the Okeke Allied Constructions accounts. My father had added me years ago when I helped him manage some procurement, during a period when his accountant had fallen ill. I barely ever touched it. He said some transactions looked unusual. I told him I had made no recent transactions. He said okay, he would look into it. He sounded like he believed me. We talked for a few more minutes about normal things and hung up. I did not sleep well that night. I told myself it was nothing. A banking error, a reconciliation issue. These things happened with company accounts all the time. But something about his voice, the way he was careful, like he was choosing each word, that sat in my stomach like a stone. 2 weeks later, my sister Adaura called me, whispering from her room in Magodo. She said Chiamaka had shown her father a printed bank statement. She said she had seen it briefly on the dining table before Chiamaka covered it. She heard her father say very quietly that he needed to think. Adaura was crying softly while she told me. She was 18 then, in her first year at University of Lagos. Smart girl, sharp eyes. I drove to the house that evening. Chiamaka was in the living room watching television when I arrived. She greeted me warmly, offered me food. Normal. My father was in his study. I knocked and entered. He was sitting at his desk, not doing anything, just sitting. That was strange. My father is never idle. I asked him directly what was going on with the account. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he put a printed statement on the desk between us. There were 6 transactions highlighted in yellow marker. They totaled just over 480,000 naira, spread across 4 months. Small withdrawals, each one under 100,000. The kind of amount designed to not trigger alerts. I told him I did not make those withdrawals. I told him to look at the dates. I could tell him exactly where I was on those dates. I asked him to check the IP addresses of the online transactions, check if they came from my devices. He nodded slowly.
He said he would look into it. But here is what he did not tell me that night. He did not tell me that Chiamaka had been building a case against me for 3 months. He did not tell me she had already spoken to his lawyer friend, Ba Eze, about how to remove a signatory from a company account. He did not tell me she had been whispering into his ear, night after night, about how his children from his first marriage would never accept her, about how the oldest one, me, was quietly draining his business while pretending to care. I did not know any of that. Not yet. I want you to stop for a second and think about this. Chiamaka never once confronted me. She never raised her voice at me. She never gave me a single reason to fight back. Because she was not fighting, she was planting, quietly, consistently, over months. She was planting seeds of doubt in my father's mind. Seeds that looked exactly like concern. Seeds that looked exactly like a loving wife protecting her husband from people who wanted to take advantage of him. And my father, a brilliant man in business, a man who had survived Lagos and built an empire with his bare hands, was completely blind to it because it was coming from inside his home, because it was coming from the woman he loved. That is the cruelty of it. The confrontation happened on a Friday evening in March. I had gone to the house to drop some documents my father had requested for a project tender. Nothing dramatic, just a normal visit. But when I walked through the gate, I could feel something was different. The gate man, Musa, who always greeted me with enthusiasm, just looked at the floor when I passed. I went inside. My father was in the sitting room. Chiamaka was seated beside him, not opposite, not across the room, but right beside him, which I noticed because they did not normally sit that way when I visited, like she was forming a wall. On the center table was a manila folder. My father asked me to sit down. He opened the folder. There were more printed statements, more highlighted transactions, but this time there was also a printed email, an email from someone formatted to look like it came from my work address, asking about transfer timing and clearing funds before quarter end. It was not an email I had written. The email address was almost my work address, one letter off, almost. I told him that email was not from me. I told him to look at the address carefully. I picked it up and pointed to the letter that was different. One character, a 0 where there should have been a letter O. A fake email designed to look real at first glance. Chiamaka said very quietly, very calmly, that it was easy to explain things after the fact, that I had been given every opportunity and every benefit of the doubt, that she was saying this with love as someone who wanted this family to heal. I looked at her. She looked back at me with eyes that were completely steady. No guilt, no flicker, nothing. My father said he had already spoken to his lawyer. He said the signatory arrangement on the account would be changed. He said he needed time to think about everything. I said, "Papa, please do not do this. This is not what it looks like." He said, "Chimandi, go home. I need time." I left the house. I sat in my car outside the gate for 15 minutes, shaking, not from anger, from the particular horror of watching someone you love believe something that is not true about you, and knowing with absolute certainty that nothing you say will matter in that moment. My phone buzzed. It was Adora. She said, "Brother, I believe you. I know it's not you." That text message, that small, tiny text from my 18-year-old sister, was the only thing that kept me from completely breaking down. Here is something they don't tell you about being falsely accused by someone close to you. The world does not pause to investigate. Life keeps moving. My father kept working. Chiamaka kept running the household. Adora kept going to school. And I kept going to my job at the architecture firm every day, drawing building plans, attending client meetings, eating lunch alone, and replaying every conversation in my head, looking for the moment I could have prevented any of it. I hired someone to help me. Not a lawyer yet. I didn't think I needed a lawyer for a family matter, which I now understand was naive. I hired a private technology consultant, a young man named Tobechukwu, who specialized in digital forensics. I explained the situation and I asked him to help me prove that those transactions did not originate from my devices. Tobechukwu pulled the records. It took him 2 weeks, and when he came back to me, he sat across from me in a small office in Victoria Island and he said, "Oga, every single one of those transactions was initiated from one IP address, and that IP address belongs to the router in your father's house in Magodo." I stared at him. He said it again slowly so I would not miss it. The fraudulent transactions, every single one, were made from inside my father's house, not from my apartment in Lekki, not from my work computer, from inside the Magodo compound. Someone in that house had my login credentials. Someone in that house had been making those transactions and then printing statements and highlighting them and placing them in front of my father. I thought about Chiamaka on that phone call 3 months into the marriage. Just be patient. These things take time. My hands were completely still on the table. That was the strange thing. I thought I would shake or rage or cry, but everything went very, very still inside me.
Now, before I continue, and I promise you this story is about to take a turn you are not expecting. If you have been watching this far and you feel something in your chest, if this story is touching something real in you, please subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that bell. Because we tell these kinds of stories here. Real, raw, human stories about family and betrayal and truth. And you do not want to miss what is coming. Now, back to the story. I did not rush to my father with Tobechukwu's findings. I know that might seem strange. You might think, why wait? Why not run there immediately and clear your name? Because I was thinking clearly now. And thinking clearly meant understanding that going to my father with a report from a private consultant was not going to be enough. Chiamaka would say Tobechukwu was working for me. She would say the report was fabricated. She would find a way to plant doubt in every piece of evidence I presented, because that is what she had been doing from the beginning. She was extraordinarily good at it. I needed something she could not dispute. I needed something she did not know existed. And this is where Adaora comes in. My sister, quiet, observant, 18-year-old Adaora had done something that I did not know about. About a month before all of this exploded, she had noticed that something was happening with the house's finances. She had seen Chiamaka on my father's laptop late at night. Not unusual by itself, couples share devices, but something about the way Chiamaka was sitting, the angle of the screen, the way she minimized the window when Adaora passed felt wrong to her. Adaora had not said anything to me or my father. She was young. She did not want to cause problems. She told herself she was imagining things. But she had, completely on her own, done one small, quiet, extraordinary thing. The compound in Magodo had a small CCTV system that my father had installed 2 years earlier after a minor security incident. 2 cameras outside, 1 in the garage, and this is the crucial part, 1 small indoor camera that covered the entrance of the study and the hallway leading to my father's home office. My father had mentioned the cameras once and then completely forgotten about them. He never checked the footage. No one did. They were just there, recording and overwriting on a 30-day loop. Adaora had remembered the cameras, and one day, when both Chiamaka and my father were out, she had asked Musa, the gateman, who had a peripheral access to the system, to help her pull the last 30 days of footage from the indoor camera onto a USB drive. She had been holding that USB drive for 3 weeks. She did not know exactly what she was looking for. She had watched some of it, she told me later, but the footage was long and she was not sure what she was seeing meant what she thought it meant. She gave it to me in the parking lot of her university one Thursday afternoon, pressed it in my hand without a word, and then went back inside. I drove to Tobechukwu's office. He watched the footage with me. It took us 4 hours going through it methodically. And then, at the 2-hour, 40-minute mark of a random Tuesday night, we found it. Chiamaka, in the hallway outside the study, at 11:47 p.m. My father was clearly already in their bedroom. You could see the bedroom door closed at the end of the hall. She had my father's laptop under her arm.
She was wearing a house robe and carrying a small notebook. She stopped in the hallway, looked both ways, then went into the study. The camera angle did not cover inside the study, but we did not need to, because 22 minutes later, she came back out, without the notebook. She was on her phone. She stood in the hallway for a moment looking at the phone screen, then went back to the bedroom. Tobechukwu looked at me. He cross-referenced the timestamp. That Tuesday night, 11:47 p.m. to 12:09 p.m. One of the fraudulent transactions had been executed at 11:59 p.m. that same night. I sat back in my chair. I exhaled. I had been holding my breath for the better part of 2 months, and I finally exhaled. But this is the part that breaks me when I think about it. Even then, even with the USB footage, even with Tobechukwu's IP analysis, even with everything aligned and pointing to one undeniable conclusion, I was still almost too late. Because while I was building my case carefully, while I was being methodical and precise and doing everything right, Chiamaka had been moving faster than me. My father's lawyer called me on a Wednesday morning. He sounded uncomfortable. He said my father had instructed him to formally remove me as signatory from all company accounts effective immediately. He said it was already done. He also said, and here his voice dropped very slightly, that my father was considering whether to formally pursue the matter further, to report it, as in to the police. I sat in my office with my phone in my hand, and I understood for the first time the full scope of what Chiamaka had been building. She had not just wanted to damage my relationship with my father. She wanted to remove me as a financial presence entirely, from the accounts, from the business succession, from everything. And she wanted to do it in a way that could potentially put me in a cell. I called Tobechukwu. I told him we needed to move now, not next week, today. He said he needed 2 more hours to compile everything into a presentable package. The IP analysis, the timestamp correlations, the footage. I said I would be at his office in 20 minutes. I called Adaura. She did not pick up the first time. She picked up the second. She was whispering. She was in class. I told her to check her messages. I told her to trust me. She said she did. I called my father's mobile. It rang 7 times and went to voicemail. I called the house phone. Chiamaka picked up. I said I needed to speak to my father urgently. She said he was unavailable. Her voice was the same as always, pleasant, measured, completely calm. I drove to the Magodo house that afternoon with Tobechukwu and a printed binder of evidence that was 43 pages long. Musa opened the gate without being asked. He stepped aside and would not meet my eyes, but he opened the gate. I believe that Musa had always known something was wrong, but what can a gateman in Lagos do? My father was home. His car was in the garage. Chiamaka had lied to me on the phone. I went inside. My father came out of the living room when he heard voices. He looked at me and his face did something complicated, something between relief and weariness and grief all at the same time. I said, "Papa, before you say anything, please sit down and give me 20 minutes. That is all I'm asking. 20 minutes. He looked at Tobechukwu. He looked at the binder in my hand. He sat down. Chiamaka appeared at the top of the stairs. She saw the binder. I watched something pass across her face, the first real thing I had ever seen cross her face. And then she composed herself and came slowly down the stairs. My father said, "Chiamaka, please sit down." She sat. And for the first time, she was not beside him. She sat across the room. That distance meant everything. Tobechukwu opened the binder. He spoke quietly and professionally. He explained his methodology. He showed the IP analysis. He showed the timestamps. He showed the CCTV footage. He had pulled the relevant clip onto a tablet and he played it on the screen. Chiamaka, in the hallway, in the middle of the night, with my father's laptop. My father watched the footage twice. He said nothing. Then he looked at Chiamaka. Chiamaka said the footage was inconclusive. She said she had been using the laptop to check her email. She said she often used it at night. She said there was nothing wrong with using her husband's computer. My father said very quietly, at 11:50 at night in the hallway. Chiamaka said she had trouble sleeping sometimes. My father said, what was in the notebook? And there it was. That was the question that cracked everything. Because the notebook, the small notebook she had been carrying, had never come up before. No one had mentioned a notebook. Tobechukwu had only flagged it when compiling the footage. My father had not been briefed on the notebook detail. He had noticed it himself, watching the clip. Chiamaka opened her mouth, closed it, and in that silence, that 3-second infinite silence, my father's face changed. It changed completely. I am not going to dramatize what happened next. I am going to tell you exactly what happened, because the truth is dramatic enough on its own. Chiamaka began to cry. She said she was trying to protect my father from me. She said I had never accepted her. She said she had found the credentials in a notebook that my father himself had written them in. And yes, she admitted it. She admitted using the account, but she said she had been testing to see if I was monitoring the account. She had been trying to catch me. She said she had done it out of love. My father said, you transferred money from my company account to test whether my son was stealing from me? She said the money had been moved to a separate account and she could return it. My father said, which account? She could not answer that. And the silence that followed was the kind of silence that ends things. My father asked me and Tobechukwu to wait outside. We sat on the veranda for 40 minutes. I could not hear exactly what was being said inside, but I could hear tones. My father's voice, low and precise, Chiamaka's voice, which started controlled and became uncontrolled, and then became something I had never heard from her before, something desperate and jagged that did not sound like her at all. Adaora arrived during those 40 minutes. She had left university early. She sat beside me on the veranda and held my hand, and neither of us spoke. We just sat there, listening to the sounds of a marriage breaking apart inside our family home. When my father came out, he looked 20 years older. He stood in front of me. He did not touch me, which was unusual because my father is not an unaffectionate man. He just stood there, and then he said, Chindima, I am sorry. 3 words. 3 words from a man who, in my entire 26 years, I had never once heard apologize to anyone. He said it again, I am sorry, my son. And then he walked back inside, not to Chiamaka, to his study. He closed the door, and that was that. I did not feel victorious. I want you to know that. I did not feel relief or satisfaction or any of the things you might expect. I felt grief, because the person who was supposed to protect me had for months believed the worst possible thing about me. And no matter how this ended, that was a thing that had happened. That could not unhappen. The CCTV cleared me, but the clearing came too late for me not to have experienced every single day of those months, carrying the weight of my own father's doubt. Some damage does not undo itself just because the truth comes out. Chiamaka left the house that night. She went to her sister's place in Surulere. She did not fight. She did not create a scene. She left quietly, the same way she had done everything, quietly. I wondered, watching her car reversed out of the compound, what the original plan was, what the end game looked like in her mind. Had she expected to erase me from my father's life and business completely before he ever found out? Had she thought she would never be caught? Or had she known somewhere deep down that there was always a risk and decided it was worth taking? I never found out the answer to that, and maybe I never will. The legal process took 4 months. My father's lawyer, Ba Eze, the same one who had called me about being removed from the accounts, worked quietly to trace where the transferred funds had gone. 3 separate transactions, altogether 920,000 naira. The money had gone to an account in Chiamaka's maiden name, one that predated the marriage. My father did not press criminal charges. I think about that decision a lot. He could have. Tobechukwu's analysis, combined with the footage, was more than enough to build a case. But my father is from a generation of men who swallow certain things privately. He said he did not want his business in the newspapers. He said he did not want to go through a prolonged court process. He said, and this is the part that still sits with me, he said he just wanted it to be over. The divorce was finalized in September. My name was reinstated on the company accounts by October. Business went back to normal on the surface of things, but underneath the surface, everything had changed.
My father and I did not have a big reconciliation scene. No sitting down with tears and declarations. We're not that kind of family. What we had was this. He started calling me again in the evenings, just to talk about the business, about a project tender, about what was happening in the construction industry. Normal conversations. But one evening in November, about 2 months after the divorce, he called me and he was not talking about work. He said, "I had a dream about your mother last night." He had not mentioned my mother to me in years. He said she was standing in the kitchen of the old house in Newi, the house he grew up in. She was wearing yellow. She was not doing anything, just standing there looking at him. I said, "What was she saying?" He said, "Nothing. She was just looking at me, the way she used to look at me when I had done something I needed to think about." We were both quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your mother would have seen through Chiamaka in the first week." I said, "I know, Papa." He said, "You tried to tell me. You tried to tell me something was off." I had not, actually, not in explicit terms. I had mostly kept my unease to myself because I did not want to cause problems. But in his memory, I had tried to warn him, and I was not going to correct that. Some things a person needs to believe about themselves in order to keep going. I said, "You would have gotten there, Papa. You are getting there." He said, "Too slowly." I said, "But you got there." There was another silence, and then he said good night and hung up. And that was our reconciliation. That was everything. Here is what I need you to sit with for a moment, because this is the part that matters more than the plot, more than the CCTV, more than the recovered money. Chiamaka spent 2 years in my father's life. 2 years of patience and precision and careful planning. She moved people away from him. She isolated him from his brother, from his oldest friends, from the son who had been beside him since the beginning. She built a fortress around him that looked like a marriage, and then she began dismantling everything from inside. The terrifying thing, and I mean this genuinely, is how close it worked. If Adara had not been watching, if my sister, at 18 years old, had not had the quiet presence of mind to notice something and save that footage, everything goes differently. The signatory removal happens, the police matter potentially moves forward. My reputation in the construction industry, where everything runs on trust and relationships, is finished. My father and I never recover, and Chiamaka has exactly what she was building toward: an unchallenged access to a wealthy man who has been separated from everyone who loves him. That is not a movie plot. That is a blueprint that exists in the real world. It happens in this city, Lagos, every day to people who are not watching carefully enough. I moved back into the Magodo house for 6 months after the divorce. Not permanently. I was not a child. I had my own life. But my father asked me to come, and I came. Adara was there. The 3 of us ate dinner together most evenings for those 6 months. My father told stories I had never heard him tell, about his early days in Lagos, about my mother, about the stupid mistakes he made when he was 23 and trying to get his first contract. He laughed more in those 6 months than I had seen him laugh in years. The house felt like itself again. I am not going to tell you my father is completely healed from this.
He is 61 years old and he was manipulated by someone he loved and trusted, and that leaves a mark on a man regardless of the way the story ends. He is more guarded now. He checks things more carefully. He trusts more slowly. Some of that is wisdom. Some of it is damage. The line between the two is not always clear. But he is here. He is present. He is my father, and I am still his son. About 8 months after everything ended, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. I picked up, and the voice was Chiamaka's. I almost ended the call. I did not. She said she was not calling to apologize. She said she called because she needed me to know one thing. She said, "I did not think it would go as far as it did." I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "The transactions. At first, it was just about the account access. I needed to know how much control he had given you, how much you were involved. I was not planning to keep the money." I said, "But you did." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I made mistakes." I said, "You made choices." Another silence. Another silence that lasted long enough for me to know she had no answer. I said, "What did you want? What were you actually trying to get?" She said, "Security." Just that, security. I thought about my mother, who loved my father for 17 years and asked for nothing except to be loved back. I thought about my father, who had spent a decade grieving her and then opened his heart again to someone who was tallying his assets from the first dinner. I said, "I hope you find it somewhere else." And I ended the call. There is something I have thought about ever since, something that does not have a clean resolution. In all of this, the planning, the execution, the patient dismantling, Chiamaka was responding to something real. She was a woman in her late 30s who had never married, who had no financial security of her own, who lived in a city that can be absolutely ruthless to people who have nothing to fall back on. I am not excusing what she did. I want to be very clear about that. What she did was a calculated, deliberate betrayal of a man who had given her his name and his home and his trust. That cannot be justified. But I also know that Lagos can make people desperate in ways that are hard to fully understand unless you have felt that particular desperation yourself. The city makes certain promises and breaks them daily. And some people in their desperation make choices that are not just wrong, but monstrous, and they make those choices because they cannot see any other way. Understanding that does not mean forgiving it, but I carry it with me, because I don't want to be the kind of person who reduces another human being to just their worst act, even when that worst act was directed at me and my family. Even Chiamaka is more than what she did in my father's house.
My father remarried 3 years later. I know, but hear me out. Her name is Mrs. Ifeoma Anibo. She is a retired secondary school principal from Enugu. She is 60 years old. She has adult children of her own and grandchildren she talks about constantly. She met my father at a church conference in Abuja. She was not impressed by his money. She was interested in his opinion on a sermon they had both heard. They argued about it for 40 minutes over jollof rice and then exchanged numbers. She told my father on their third meeting that she was not interested in his accounts or his company or his properties. She said she had spent 35 years building her own life and she was not about to borrow someone else's. She said if they were going to be together, they would be together as two complete people, not as a rich man and a woman who needed to be rescued. My father called me that same night and said, "Chindima, I met someone. She argued with me." I said, "She argued with you?" He said, "Yes, about theology. She was completely wrong and she refused to admit it." I said, "Papa, I think you like her." He said, trying to sound unbothered, "I find her interesting." She was at our Christmas gathering that year. She pulled Adora aside and spent an hour asking her courses and her career plans and giving her unsolicited but apparently excellent advice about how to negotiate in any industry as a young woman.
Adoro texted me from across the room. I think I love her. They got married quietly in Enugu the following June. Small ceremony, family only. My father looked nervous the entire day in a way that was so unlike him, it was almost funny. Mrs. Ifeoma, Mama Ifeoma we call her now, held his hand walking into the reception and leaned up to whisper something in his ear, and he laughed, a real, full, uncalculated laugh. I thought about my mother that day too. I always will at these moments, but I thought about her gently, without the ache. I thought she would have liked Mama Ifeoma. She would have sat across from her at a table and felt immediately that this was a woman who wanted nothing from my father except my father. That is what real protection looks like. I want to end this by talking to you directly, because I think some of you watching this have felt some version of what I felt. Maybe not this exactly. Maybe it is not a stepmother or a father. Maybe it is a colleague who has been quietly building a case against you in the background. Maybe it is a family member who smiles at you and works against you at the same time. Maybe it is someone who has convinced the person you love most to doubt you, and you are sitting in the rubble of that, trying to understand how it happened. Here's what I know. The truth has weight. It is slow, sometimes brutally slow, but it has weight. Lies require constant maintenance. They require someone to keep showing up, keep adjusting, keep managing perception. The truth does not require anything. It just sits there, patient, heavy, waiting to be found. Adora found it on a USB drive. Tobechukwu found it in an IP address. My father found it in a 3-second silence when a woman could not explain a notebook. The truth always leaves evidence, always. And if you are currently in a situation where someone has convinced people you love that you are something you are not, do not collapse. Do not disappear. Do not become the angry, bitter version of yourself that gives them something real to point at. Gather yourself. Find your adoras, the people who believe you and are watching carefully. Build your case quietly and methodically, and wait. Not passively, actively wait, the way Chiamaka waited, except for truth instead of destruction. Because that's the other thing this story taught me. Patience is not inherently good or bad. It depends entirely on what you are being patient for. My name is Chindiman Okeke. My father is Chief Silvanus Okeke. My sister is Adora. And we are all still standing in this mad, beautiful, exhausting, wonderful city of Lagos. That is enough. If this story moved you, if something in it touched something real in your life, I want you to subscribe to this channel before you leave, not because of numbers or algorithms, but because we build something here, together, story by story, truth by truth. People who have gone through things, people who have survived things, people who refuse to let the hardest moments of their lives be the last word. Subscribe, hit the bell, share this if it speaks to you. And to every person watching who has been falsely accused, who has been quietly walked against by someone who smiled at them every single day, I see you. I believe you. The CCTV is still recording somewhere. The truth is still accumulating. Keep going. We will see you in the next one.